They said I was spying on my neighbors with a drone I never owned, and they fined me $1,200 for a crime that never happened. What they didn't know was that the evidence they used to destroy my reputation would eventually expose the person who was actually watching everyone. My name is Ethan Parker, and for almost 8 years, I lived in a quiet little neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates just outside Nashville, Tennessee, the kind of place where people waved when they drove by, kids rode bikes until sunset, and everyone pretended the biggest problem in the community was whose trash can was left at the curb too long. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. The truth was, behind those perfectly trimmed lawns and freshly painted mailboxes was a neighborhood controlled by an HOA that had slowly forgotten the difference between maintaining a community and controlling the people living inside it. My house was nothing fancy, just a 2-story brick home sitting on about a third of an acre, with a dark green metal roof that my wife, Claire, always joked was the easiest house in the neighborhood to find during a storm. She'd say, "If we ever get lost, just look for the giant green hat on the house." And honestly, those little jokes were the kind of things that made the place feel like home. I wasn't a troublemaker. I worked, paid my bills, kept my yard clean, and stayed out of everyone's business. I wasn't the guy who showed up at every HOA meeting complaining about flowers being 2 inches too tall or arguing about mailbox colors. I just wanted a quiet life. But one Tuesday morning, everything changed when I opened my front door and found an envelope sitting on my porch with a bright red stamp across the top that said, Jürgen HOA Compliance. I remember standing there with my coffee in my hand, still half asleep, thinking maybe it was about some minor landscaping issue. Maybe they wanted me to trim a bush or repaint something. Honestly, I would have preferred that. Instead, when I opened the letter, I saw a bold accusation that made my stomach drop. Unauthorized aerial surveillance. The HOA claimed I had been using a drone to secretly record my neighbors. There was a $1,200 fine attached, along with a warning that further violations could lead to legal action. I actually laughed for a second because I thought it had to be a mistake, a bad one, but still a mistake. Then I read the next line, and the laugh disappeared. They said they had proof. Attached to the letter were 3-color screenshots showing the neighborhood from above. My house was circled in red like someone had marked a target. According to the HOA, the drone had launched from my property, and the images had been uploaded using my internet connection. The problem was simple. I didn't own a drone. I had never flown one. I barely knew how to connect my smart TV to Wi-Fi without calling my nephew for help. The idea that I was secretly flying cameras around the neighborhood was ridiculous. But HOA accusations don't work like normal rumors. Once they put something official on paper, people start treating it like a fact. Within a few days, things changed. The same neighbors who used to stop and talk suddenly became uncomfortable. A guy who lived 3 houses down, someone I had barbecued with the previous summer, stopped making eye contact. One afternoon, I was walking my golden retriever, Max, and a woman across the street literally turned around and went back inside when she saw me coming. That part hurt more than the fine. The money was annoying, but being looked at like I was some kind of creep in the neighborhood I had called home for years felt different. It felt personal. I decided I wasn't going to ignore it, so I went to the next HOA meeting with the letter in my hand. The room was packed, and I could feel people watching me before I even sat down. At the front of the room was Marcus Whitmore, the HOA president. Marcus was the kind of guy who always looked like he was about to appear in a commercial for expensive watches. Perfect hair, perfect suit, and the little silver house-shaped tie clip he wore at every meeting like it was some kind of badge of authority. I walked up to him and asked, "Where exactly did you get this evidence?" He didn't even look nervous. He just leaned back and smiled. "We have documentation from our technology partner," he said. "You violated community privacy rules." I looked around the room and asked, "So you're saying I'm guilty because someone showed you pictures from the sky?" Marcus folded his arms. "The evidence speaks for itself." That sentence bothered me because people who are telling the truth usually don't hide behind phrases like that. They explain. They answer questions. Marcus just wanted everyone to accept his version of events. I told him, then prove it. Show me the flight records. Show me the drone registration. Show me anything connecting this to me. For a moment, the room got quiet. I thought maybe he would finally admit there was a mistake. Instead, he pushed a revised notice across the table. The fine had doubled. Late fees had already been added, and at the bottom was a warning that the HOA could involve law enforcement if I refused to acknowledge responsibility. That was the moment something inside me changed. I wasn't angry because I had been fined. I was angry because they weren't looking for the truth. They had already decided who the villain was. And apparently, that villain was me. So that night, after Claire and I sat at the kitchen table going over the documents again and again, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them with emotion. I wasn't going to scream at meetings or argue with neighbors. I was going to find out where those pictures came from, because somewhere behind that accusation was a person who knew exactly what they were doing. And if the HOA wanted a fight based on evidence, I was going to make sure they saw every piece of it. The next morning, I called my attorney, Daniel Reeves, a guy I had known for years through a friend of mine, and the first thing he said after reading the HOA letter was something I'll never forget. He looked at me over his glasses and said, "Ethan, the problem with bad evidence is that people usually don't question it until someone forces them to." That was exactly what had happened. The HOA had taken 3 pictures, wrapped them in an official-looking document, and suddenly an entire neighborhood believed a story they had never bothered to verify. Daniel didn't promise me some dramatic courtroom victory. He didn't tell me we were going to destroy anyone. He just said, "Let's follow the facts." And honestly, that was the first time in weeks I felt like someone was actually listening. We started with the simplest question: where did these images really come from? The HOA claimed the pictures were uploaded from my internet connection, so Daniel requested the technical records behind their accusation. At first glance, the information looked convincing. There was an IP address connected to the upload. There were timestamps. There were screenshots. The kind of things that sound impressive when someone reads them in a meeting and expects everyone else to just nod along. But when Daniel dug deeper, he noticed something strange. The IP address wasn't registered to my house. It wasn't even registered to my street. It belonged to a small wireless signal booster attached to a utility pole near the entrance of Willow Creek Estates. I remember sitting across from Daniel when he showed me the report. He pointed at the address and said, "This isn't your connection, Ethan." I stared at the screen and asked, "Then how did they get my house attached to it?" He smiled slightly and said, "That's the question we need answered." The more we investigated, the stranger things became. That Wi-Fi extender wasn't private. It wasn't password protected. Anyone within range could potentially connect to it. A delivery driver sitting in their car, a contractor working nearby, a neighbor walking past with the right equipment, basically anyone. The HOA had taken a weak piece of technical information and presented it like undeniable proof. That was only the beginning. Daniel then asked for the original files of the aerial images, not just the screenshots the HOA had printed. This was where everything started falling apart, because digital images carry information most people never think about: hidden details, creation dates, camera information, flight data, things that don't disappear just because someone wants them to. A few days later, Daniel called me and told me to come by his office. The second I walked in, I knew something had changed. He had that look lawyers get when they found something important, but they're trying not to get ahead of themselves. He placed a folder on the desk and said, "Ethan, these pictures weren't taken by a neighborhood drone." I asked, "What do you mean?" He opened the report and explained that the images came from a commercial aerial mapping company, not a homeowner flying a small drone around the neighborhood. The camera system was completely different. The altitude was different. The flight pattern was different. These weren't random pictures taken by someone sneaking around. They were professional survey images captured from hundreds of feet in the air as part of a larger mapping project. Then he showed me the part that made me sit back in my chair. The company had completed a county-approved aerial survey 2 weeks before the HOA sent me that letter. The flight record showed the exact same area, the exact same streets, and the exact same type of images. I remember saying, "So they knew this wasn't my drone?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He just looked at the paperwork and said, "I think we need to find out who hired them." That question led us to the biggest discovery of the entire case. We contacted the aerial mapping company and asked for their records. At first, they were hesitant. They said they couldn't release client information without proper authorization. But after Daniel explained the situation and the accusation against me, they agreed to provide documents through the legal process. And when those documents arrived, everything changed. There it was, an invoice, a contract, a signature. The client who hired the company for a private neighborhood aerial inspection was Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, and the person who signed the agreement was Marcus Whitmore, the same man who stood in front of the entire community and accused me of spying. I just sat there staring at that signature for a long time. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was something else. Disappointment. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about trust. Marcus had convinced my neighbors that I was the person invading their privacy, while he was the one who had paid a company to photograph everyone's homes from above. The reason became clearer when we looked through the HOA emails attached to the documents. Marcus wasn't looking for security concerns. He wasn't investigating some emergency. He had created what he called a community compliance initiative. Basically, he wanted aerial images of every property so the HOA could identify possible violations, unapproved sheds, fence issues, landscaping changes, anything they could use to send warning letters and fines. He had turned the entire neighborhood into a surveillance project. And the worst part was that he never told anyone. He never asked permission. He never held a community vote. He simply decided that because he was the HOA president, he had the right to monitor everyone. Suddenly, every strange little thing people had complained about started making sense. The neighbor who got a warning about a backyard structure she thought nobody could see. The family that received a notice about a roof change they had made months earlier. People had been wondering how the HOA knew so much. Now we knew. Marcus had been watching from above. When we prepared for the hearing, Daniel organized everything carefully. No emotional speeches, no personal attacks, just facts. 3 pieces of evidence would tell the entire story. The county flight permit proving the aerial survey existed, the invoice showing Marcus authorized it, and the metadata analysis proving the images used against me came from that same survey. A few days before the hearing, I walked through the neighborhood again with Max, and something felt different. People still looked uncomfortable. Some still didn't know what to believe. But now I knew the truth was coming. For weeks, I had been treated like a criminal because one man wanted everyone to believe his version of the story. But soon, that story was going to fall apart in front of everyone. And this time, Marcus wouldn't be able to hide behind a letter, a fine, or a confident smile. He would have to answer a much harder question. Why did the person accusing everyone else of being watched become the person who was actually doing the watching? The hearing happened on a Thursday morning, and strangely enough, I remember almost everything about that day, not because it was some dramatic movie moment where everyone suddenly stood up and applauded, but because it was the first time in weeks that I felt like I could finally breathe. I had spent so much time defending myself against something I never did that I almost forgot what it felt like to simply be believed. When I walked into that room with Daniel beside me, I wasn't carrying anger anymore. I was carrying facts. And sometimes, facts are more powerful than any argument. Across the room sat Marcus Whitmore, still wearing the same confident expression I had seen at every HOA meeting. The same straight posture, the same calm smile, the same silver house-shaped tie clip attached to his collar like a little trophy. I remember looking at that tie clip and thinking about how much it represented him. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was the image he had built for himself, the person who knew the rules, the person who protected the neighborhood, the person everyone was supposed to trust. But now that image was starting to crack. because behind that polished appearance was a man who had used the power of his position to watch people who trusted him. The hearing began with Marcus giving his side of the story. He talked about protecting property values, maintaining standards, and keeping the neighborhood safe. He used all the words people expect to hear from someone in authority. He made it sound like everything he did was for the benefit of everyone else. And for a moment, I understood why some people believed him. That was the dangerous part about people like Marcus. They didn't always sound unreasonable. They wrapped questionable decisions inside good intentions. They made control sound like responsibility. They made surveillance sound like protection. But the problem was simple. Good intentions don't erase the consequences of your actions. When Daniel stood up, he didn't attack Marcus personally. He didn't call him a liar. He didn't need dramatic words. He simply placed the evidence on the table one piece at a time. First, the county flight permit showing the aerial survey had been planned and approved before the HOA ever accused me. Second, the invoice from the commercial mapping company showing who hired them and who authorized payment. Third, the technical report proving the images came from that professional survey and not from a drone operating out of my backyard. Daniel looked at the judge and calmly said, "The HOA built this entire case around the assumption that my client was the person behind these images, but the evidence shows the opposite. The person who ordered this surveillance was the president of the HOA himself." Nobody said anything for a few seconds. It was one of those silences where you could almost hear people processing what they had just heard. The same neighbors who had once whispered about me were now looking in a completely different direction. Marcus immediately leaned forward and tried to explain. He said the aerial survey was only intended to identify possible violations. He said the HOA had a responsibility to maintain the appearance and value of the community. He said homeowners agreed to certain rules when they purchased their properties. And technically, some of that sounded reasonable. But then the judge asked the question that changed everything. "Mr. Whitmore, where in those community rules does it give you permission to secretly collect aerial images of private homes and then punish residents using those images?" Marcus paused. For the first time, he didn't have a quick answer. He looked down at the documents in front of him, then back at the judge. The confidence was gone. The carefully prepared explanations weren't working anymore. Because the problem was no longer whether the neighborhood had rules. The problem was whether one person had decided those rules gave him unlimited power. And that was something the judge clearly did not accept. The ruling came faster than I expected. The $200 fine against me was dismissed completely. Not reduced. Not negotiated. Gone. The judge ruled that the HOA had failed to prove I had committed any violation and had relied on misleading information to justify the accusation. Then came the part nobody in that room expected. The HOA itself was penalized $10,000 for unauthorized aerial monitoring and was ordered to destroy all collected images from the survey. They were also prohibited from conducting any future aerial monitoring of homeowner properties without proper written consent. But the requirement that seemed to hit Marcus the hardest was the public apology, because an apology meant admitting, in front of the entire community, that the person they had warned everyone about wasn't the problem. The person they trusted was. The next morning, Marcus resigned. I wasn't there when it happened, but one of the neighbors told me he arrived early, cleaned out his office, and left before most people came in. Apparently, that silver house-shaped tie clip he always wore ended up sitting inside a small cardboard box along with the rest of his belongings. And maybe it sounds petty, but I'll admit something. Seeing that box gave me a strange feeling of closure. Not happiness, not revenge, just closure. Because for weeks, I had felt like I was fighting a machine that couldn't be questioned. The HOA had rules, paperwork, authority, and a room full of people ready to believe them. I only had the truth. And in the end, that was enough. After everything settled down, the neighborhood slowly changed. The same people who avoided me started waving again. A few neighbors stopped by and apologized. One elderly couple told me they felt embarrassed because they had believed the accusation without ever asking for my side. And I told them I understood. Because honestly, I couldn't blame everyone. Fear spreads quickly. A confident accusation from someone in power can be more convincing than the truth from someone standing alone. That was the part of this whole experience that stayed with me the longest. Not the fine, not the hearing, not even Marcus losing his position. It was realizing how fragile trust can be inside a community. A neighborhood isn't held together by HOA documents or perfect lawns or matching mailboxes. It's held together by people choosing to treat each other fairly. Rules are supposed to create peace, not fear. They're supposed to protect homeowners, not turn neighbors into suspects. I still live in that same house today. The green roof is still there. Max still walks the same streets. The neighborhood still looks almost exactly the same from the outside. But I see it differently now. I pay attention to the people behind the titles and positions. Because sometimes the person telling everyone else to follow the rules is the person who needs to be reminded why those rules exist in the first place. I never wanted to expose Marcus. I never wanted a public fight. I never wanted someone to lose their role. All I wanted was the chance to prove I wasn't guilty of something I never did. And maybe that's the biggest lesson from everything that happened. When someone tries to use authority to silence you, the answer isn't always to fight louder. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stay calm, collect the truth, and let the evidence speak for itself. Now, I want to hear what you think. Was Marcus simply trying to protect the neighborhood? Or did he cross a serious line by secretly monitoring homeowners and then blaming someone else for it? If you were in my position, would you have taken the legal route and fought back? Or would you have walked away and avoided the drama? Leave your thoughts in the comments because these stories are never just about HOA rules or neighborhood disagreements. They're about trust, privacy, and the balance between community control and personal freedom. And if you enjoy stories where ordinary people stand up when someone in power goes too far, make sure to subscribe, because there are always more moments where the truth finally catches up with the people who thought they were untouchable.